Please explain Psalm 78, verse 25. What is angel food? You know there's those sugar cookies that you can buy at Walmart with the big colored icing and the sprinkles, and you can feel them clogging your arteries as you eat them. I grew up calling those angel cookies because when I was a little kid, my cousin Heather, who was just here visiting, she brought her kids for VBS, she convinced me when I was a little kid that if you could catch an angel and bite its wing, that's what it would taste like. But I don't think that that's what this psalm is talking about. Let's begin this answer by getting some context in Psalm 78. We have the whole purpose of this psalm summed up for us in the introduction section beginning in verse 1. It says, "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from our children, teaching to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and His strength and His wonderful works that He has done." This psalm is essentially a history lesson. It's a history of God's dealings with Israel. It tells about the mercies and the wonders that God has shown and performed towards His people. It talks about some of the horrible sins that the people had committed against God. It talks about the punishments that God used to discipline His children. And then it talks about the mercies that He gave them despite their disobedience. And the intention of this psalm, as we've just read, and as you can continue to see in verses 5 through 7, was for parents to teach their children about these things, about the things that God had done for Israel and what happened when Israel forgot about God. That would be good for any parents to study a little bit further than what we are going to do tonight. But then Asaph, who wrote the psalm, says in verse 8 that may Israel keep God's commandments, may they not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright and whose spirit was not faithful to God. Verses 12 through 14 talks about the wonders that God showed Israel in Egypt, not only the plagues, but the Red Sea crossing that was their salvation from slavery. And so in verse 13 he says, He divided the sea and caused them to pass through. He made the waters stand up like a heap. And then he talks about in verse 14, guiding them with the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. Verse 15 and 16 tells of God providing them water from the rock on two different occasions when they were thirsty. But then in verse 17, they sinned even more against Him by rebelling against the Most High in the wilderness. And they tested God in their heart by asking for the food of their fancy. Yes, they spoke against God. They said, "Can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, He struck the rock so that water gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can He give us bread also? Can He provide meat for His people?" And I'm sure in the moment when these people complained, they felt very justified in doing so. But when you look back on the context of it in this psalm, they look very entitled, don't they? Here is a people God has done so much for them. He has freed them from slavery. He has killed their oppressors. He has guided them when they didn't know their path. He has given them water in the desert. But He hasn't yet given them the food of their fancy. These people looked at all that God had done for them, and rather than giving thanks and being content with those things, they said, if He can do that, He can give us what we want now. We want more. You ever catch yourself doing that? In verse 21, therefore, the Lord heard this and was furious, so that a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came against Israel, because they did not believe in God. They did not trust in His salvation. Yet He commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven and rained down manna on them to eat and given them the bread of heaven. Men ate angels' food. He sent them food to the full. In this context, we can see that angels' food that is being talked about is the manna that God gave the Israelites in the wilderness. As to whether or not this is literal, this is food that angels actually ate, or if this is just a poetic way of talking about bread that has come from heaven, that it was emphasizing that this bread was sent by God. I believe this is just poetry to emphasize that this food came from God, but I can't tell you for certain on that. If we were to continue reading, we would see the poetic retelling of history that Israel was not satisfied with this bread, and they continued to complain. In Numbers chapter 11 and verses 5 and 6, as we see this, the people were saying, "We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." And so the people are, despite all of these things that God has done for them, they're still ungrateful. And there's certainly application here for us today as far as being content and grateful for the blessings that God has given us. But even more so, if we look to see how Jesus applied this text in John chapter 6. So if you look in John chapter 6, in verse 31, the Jews were looking for a sign after the feeding of the 5,000, which was a sign. And they say, "Our fathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat." And they're quoting from our passage there in Psalm 78. And Jesus answered and said, "Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is He who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And so just as God gave Israel bread from heaven, angels' food, manna, to sustain their life as they wandered in the wilderness, God has given us His Son, the bread of life from heaven, to give us eternal life and to sustain us as we wander in the wilderness of this world. So let's remember the words of Psalm 78 and not be like our spiritual forefathers who complained and forgot the mercies of God, but rather let's be thankful for His provision and teach our children accordingly.